Okay, so today let's work on a Skrelv EDH concept deck. This little guy doesn't seem like he does too much, but with the right support and strategy, it might do a lot of work to help take out your opponents. Skrelv Defector Mite is a 1/1 legendary Phyrexian Mite that costs 1 white. It has Toxic 1 and can't block. It also says pay 1 Phyrexian white mana, tap it, and choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Phyrexian mana can be paid with white or 2 life. While Skrelv's ability to give creatures Toxic 1 can be built around with the creatures from the All Will Be One set and older Infect creatures, there might not be enough support for that strategy since you'd be sacrificing other creatures with more utility for a one-dimensional strategy. Skrelv's inability to block and ability to buff other creatures and ability to buff another creature puts it squarely in the support role of the deck, the goal of which is to simply get through for damage or protect your strongest creatures from targeted spells from your opponents. Now that I think about it, I think it would apply to abilities also as long as it's a certain color. But since this is a tap ability and you have multiple opponents, we want to find ways to use this ability multiple times. Once on our turn to get through for damage, and on each of our opponent's turns to protect our creatures. Cards like Manifold Key, Voltaic Key, Mage Rites, Stone, Voltaic Servant, Drum Bellower, Halo Fountain, Lita, Mechanical Engineer, and Thousand Year Elixir will all make this much easier to accomplish by allowing you to untap a target artifact or creature, and Skrelv is both of those, so we have quite a few options to use here. Some cost mana and some don't. Their effectiveness will scale with their price. So now that we can send a creature to attack safely, let's pick some creatures with effective combat triggers to make the most out of that ability. Slith Ascendant is a 1/1 flying Slith that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it. Since it already has flying, it should be able to get a few swings in before your opponents have blockers, giving it the chance to get quite beefy before Skrelv needs to protect it or help it get through. Aerial Extortionist is a 4/3 flying bird soldier that costs 3 and 2 white. It says whenever it enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it. Then, whenever another player casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. This handy guy takes care of a few options for us. It'll get rid of the most problematic permanents on the field temporarily, while giving you card draw if your opponents really want it back. And since the combat trigger will remove any non-land target thanks to Skrelv, you can attack the player with the highest life total and then target someone else's permanent. Cascade and Impulse decks will be particularly lucrative when this is out as well. Thunderwolf Cavalry is a 4/4 first strike Astartes warrior for 4 and a white. It says when it deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. This is like Drana, Liberator of Malakir, except it's really bad. But thanks to Skrelv, it's a little less bad. Battle Angels of Tyr is a 4/4 Angel Knight with Flying and Myriad for 2 and 2 white that says whenever Battle Angels of Tyr deals combat damage to a player, draw a card if that player has more cards in hand than each other player. Then you create a treasure if that player controls more lands than any other player. Then you gain 3 life if that player has more life than any other player. This creature can at the very least throw 12 damage at your opponents and possibly get you a card, treasure, or 3 life. You can't make all of them unblockable, but you can protect the original card with Skrelv, which might be more important anyway. Relic Seeker is a 2/2 human soldier for 1 and a white with Renown 1. When it deals combat damage to a player, if it isn't renowned, put a 1/1 counter on it and it becomes renowned. Then, when it becomes renowned, you can search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. I usually have trouble getting through with this particular card, so it's really an auto-include with Skrelv since it'll let it go through with little difficulty to get whatever equipment you might need at the time. Unfortunately, white didn't have many worthwhile creatures that had combat effects, so I moved on to the next best thing, vehicles. And speaking of the next best thing, why don't you hit that like button and sub to the channel if you like what you see so far and would like to see what else I put together in the future. Thanks. Nautiloid Ship is a 5/5 flying vehicle for 4 that exiles a graveyard when it enters the battlefield. Then, when it deals combat damage to any player, you can put a creature card exiled with Nautiloid Ship onto the battlefield under your control. Graveyard hate and extra bodies on the ground when dealing 5 unblockable damage isn't a bad deal. My favorite vehicle is Mighty Servant of Luck O. It's a 6/6 with trample and ward, discard a card that costs 3. Then, if you crew it with exactly 2 creatures, it gains when it deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards. The trample and ward make this wonderfully difficult to deal with, but adding Skrelv makes it a nightmare for your opponents. Now, since there weren't many combat effects in white, if we want to continue with that theme, we can add in some decent equipment cards to make any of your creatures combat threats. Quietus Spike will half an opponent's life total on a single hit. Dousing Dagger will turn into a Lost Veil when the equipped creature connects, giving you a land that will tap for 3 mana of a single color. Bloodforged Battle Axe will create a copy of itself when the equipped creature makes contact, so you can choose to equip the same creature or a different one. Since we can't do much with so few creatures, we can look at attack triggers next to see what other options we have available. Hammers of Morden is one of my favorite creatures from Battle for Baldur's Gate. It's a 3/3 for 2 and a white with Myriad. When it attacks, for each opponent, tap up to 1 target creature that player controls. Being able to tap down each of your opponent's best blockers during combat isn't a trivial combat trick, but it can deal 9 total damage if your opponents are unwilling or unable to block all 3 creatures. Aerial Surveyor is a 3/4 flying vehicle for 2 and a white with crew 2. When it attacks, if the defending player controls more lands than you, search your library for a basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Hitting an opponent for 3 and ramping a bit is a pretty big deal in mono white. Sun Titan would be great to get anything back to the battlefield that you might need in the moment, but here's an interesting angle. Since Skrelv can only make 1 creature unblockable to a color, maybe we can throw in some Exalted creatures to make that single creature a really big threat. Exalted says whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Cathedral of War is a land that has that ability, while Arcrossan Squire, Avon Squire, Knight of Glory, Sigilled Paladin, Guardians of Akrasa, Angelic Benediction, and Battle Grace Angel are the cards with Exalted we have available in white. However, Sublime Archangel is a 4/3 with flying and Exalted for 2 and 2 white that will give all of your other creatures Exalted. This has the potential to make a single creature a devastating threat that you can buff and protect with Skrelv. Just fill the holes of your deck with more card draw, and you should have no problem skittering around your opponents to deal toxic damage. But if you want to be a little evil, if you want to go the Exalted route, there won't be any harm in including a few Infect creatures to buff them to dangerous levels to throw at your opponent. Tine Shrike and Shriek Raptor are flying Infect creatures, while Core Prowler has Infect, and when it dies you can proliferate. This strategy in particular might be one that opponents will hate, and I kinda want to try it out. But for now, that's about it. Let me know how you might build Skrelv Defector Mite in the comments below. I'm sure there are some strategies that I missed. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, and until next time, I'm Space Coconut, and you're welcome.